You're now tuned into the hottest podcast in the world, the Stay Woke Podcast, right here on TheSonicBreakdown.com.
Man, it's time to wake up. Get this cake up. Only thing I care about is switching.
Welcome back to another Stay Woke Podcast. This is DeRa Brinson, and you know the Stay Woke Podcast is presented by TheSonicBreakdown.com. And today we're going to bring you another Rapture discussion, and this is going to be part 2. If you haven't, go definitely check out part 1, where we talked about the episode with Logic. And this is going to be part 2, and this is going to cover Nas and Dave East. And as the same as we had with part 1, we have Damian, Mr. Trance Man from Vibrationz Podcast, again to join us to have this discussion. Thanks again for coming, man.
Oh, thank you for the invitation, man. I'm looking forward to getting nitty-gritty with this topic.
And as I mentioned before on our part 1, we're going to do an episode for each of the Rapture documentaries on Netflix. So there will be, we're going to have a total of 9, since there's 8 episodes, and we'll have a 9th episode to kind of wrap it up and give our overall idea of the entire documentary as a series. So let's get right into it today and get into this specific part, which was the Nas and Dave East. One thing that I did find interesting about the way that they presented this episode was the fact that they split up Nas and Dave East, and they had Nas kind of first, and then Dave East kind of like the legend introducing the new and up-and-comer. I thought that was an interesting a dynamic or an interesting way to portray that kind of relationship. But before we get into that, let's talk about a little bit about just Nas in general. Were you a fan prior to the documentary? I know, but the listeners don't know. So why don't you fill them in?
Absolutely. For Nas, I've been a fan before the documentary. I was always raised in the old school hip hop genre, particularly in the 90s. I mean, I'm 25, so my parents usually played it, particularly my mom. Once I started getting into Tupac and Biggie, then it led me to Nas a long time ago. I heard the Omatic album, which is one of the best albums of all time, period, point blank. Probably the Mount Rushmore of old hip-hop. I've been having a lot of his music for a while now. Hate Me Now is another one I like. I listened to It Was Written, aside from Illmatic, even, I think it's Ether, right?
Ether.
Ether. Yeah, I've been a big fan of his for years now. But it's kind of cool that he actually produced this documentary, because not only am I a fan of his, I'm like, oh, that's awesome. He actually has a project now that I get to look forward. I can see what his vision is with making a project like this. Mm-hmm. So I think it was very awesome for him to do that, especially to his fans. So that way they can see the other side of him, the director, producer side of him. And again, what you were saying, I'm touching up on the episode where he brought Dave East, kind of the latter part of the episode.
Gotcha. Mm.
I liked how it showed Nas first, his rise a little bit about it, and then where he found Dave East, and then he brought him into that episode. I thought it was really well integrated.
I agree. For all of the listeners out there, if you've been following the Stay Woke Podcast or the Sonic Breakdown for a while, you'll know that Nas is definitely on my top 5. Probably, actually, to be real, he's like tied for first of my favorite rappers alive.
Me too.
I was very excited about this particular episode to see how much information we would get, how much we would get into the inkling of Nas, of his personal life, things of that nature. But just to go back, I just want to quickly touch on some of my favorite tracks. I think Illmatic, again, like you said, is hands down one of the greatest albums, not hip-hop, just one of the greatest albums of all time, at least for me. The World Is Yours is one of my favorite songs. Memory Lane represents One Mic. You know, it's hard to pick a favorite because he's had so many hits, so many great albums, album after album after album. But is there anything specifically about Nas that you gravitate to? That what is it about him that puts him above the rest in your mind?
Authenticity and just the realness. Got to have that. If you notice his demeanor's he's not really expressive. Mm-hmm. He's very kind of slow and methodical a bit, but I like that presence because he's very keen on his awareness, the way he presents himself, and the great knowledge he puts into his music at the same time with the right flow and beats. That's what I think of him.
For me, it's the lyricism. And that was one of the things that we'll touch into as we go further into about the episode. But that's one of the things that I kept on noticing and paying attention to was the fact that he kept on drawing attention to that Dave East, what he liked about Dave East. And the thing that I found as that overarching theme was his attentiveness to his craft of lyricism, focusing on the lines, focusing on the words. That's what gravitated me to Nas, and that's what gravitates me to, as I've said on many of the podcasts, if you listen to any of them, especially on the top 10 albums of 2017. Basically, I told you the formula to get on that list for TheSonicBreakdown.com and Stay Woke podcast is have lyrics. Be a lyricist. To me, that's the most important aspect of hip hop. To me.
So do you like artists that really hone their craft? Because that's what Nas was saying in there. He respects people to really work on their craft. He even said, and I quote, "I just can't understand how people don't do that. They just don't do shit. Work on your craft. Work on something." That's what he found in Dave East. Because if I remember correctly, he said, and I quote, "He kind of reminds me of me."
Mm-hmm. That's exactly it. Mm-hmm. And that was we'll go to Dave East in a little bit, but that's the same thing that guided me to Dave East was his lyricism. I heard about Dave East. I started to check out his music, and then I heard that he was signed, or that Nas was trying to sign him. And so that was like, I was like, I get it. I was like, I get it. Yeah, he does pay attention to, and so to me, that is why Nas is one of my favorite rappers, and it made me happy to see that that's the thing that I like about him is the same thing that he likes in other artists.
He's got an eye for talent.
Yeah. So I thought that was very, very interesting and important. And as well as not only was it the introduction of Jungle, his brother, and how he was telling the story of his introduction, or telling Nas about Dave East. I thought that was interesting as well, about how Jungle was like, just the idea of how things work out organically. Of Nas was already looking at Dave East. He doesn't know that his brother already knows about Dave East, and he's talking to his brother about him, and then his brother's like, "Oh yeah, I know that dude. Like, yeah, you should check him out." And that's kind of how the culmination of Dave East and Nas meeting came about. But I just found it interesting that, like he said in the piece, that there was, I think it was like 5 or 6 other artists that they were looking at. And what are the chances that out of all of the artists in the world, out of all the musicians, out of all the rappers, out of the 5 that Nas picked, one of those 5 just happened to know Jungle, his brother? Like, to me, it was just an interesting point plot in the story. But I do want to go back for a second on the Nas part. And one thing that I did find, as well as as an overarching theme for Nas as well, is his interaction with other people, specifically other artists, like Killer Mike's scene. I thought that was a pivotal scene, and I thought it was very interesting on his approach to not necessarily, directing, in essence, other artists and giving his opinion. The thing that caught my eye about that particular scene was the fact of how respectful they were of each other. Killer Mike was being respectful of Nas, and Nas was being respectful of Killer Mike, even though Killer Mike's telling him, his art, expressing his art, his idea to him. And sometimes when you're expressing your art, you can get, personal, touchy about somebody giving you critique or criticism about it, or any sort of, again, critique. But the way that they interacted, I thought was interesting. What did you think about that interaction between Killer Mike and just Nas's particular interactions with other people? Did you take anything out of that?
Honestly, I didn't even really pay attention to it till you just brought it to my attention just now. But now reflecting on it, I think a lot of people would appreciate the criticism from someone as great as Nas. I would easily take the criticism. I say, look, you can critique this all you want. I just want to know what improvements can I be made on this or something. Like, if this was in my shoes and I was showing him some of my art, like, what would you do? I want your opinion. But then I'm kind of asking for all the honesty, meaning the goods and the bads. Like, I'm willing to take that. So I think it's awesome for Killer Mike to kind of look beyond just like, okay, he's probably going to say some stuff about my project here, but look where he's at. Look where I'm trying to get to. Look at the respect he has. I mean, why not? Let's put it this way. If you want to be a bodybuilder and you have Schwarzenegger right there and you're saying, am I doing my form right? You kind of want to listen to what he has to say, right? Mm-hmm. What if he's like, oh, yeah, but even though you're pushing up and contracting right, you got to hold it for a couple seconds. Your personal side's like, man, I don't want to do that. Mm-hmm. But why not? Look where he's got fruit in the tree. So it makes sense to kind of listen to someone like that for my personal opinion there.
I definitely agree. And that to me, again, going back onto the relationship, the reason why I just noticed that it felt like it was heavy based on relationships because the way that they started out, again, how they introduced Jungle, his brother, and about how they kind of reconnected. How he was talking about how they weren't really talking when he was with Khalees, and then he basically was like, "Hey, man, come out here." I thought that was first of all, that was a funny ass story, but how they talked about that relationship with Jungle, then they talked about showed the relationship with him and Killer Mike. Then they talk about him trying to acquire and get more information about Dave East. And then the conversation that him and Dave East had about people from the hood. To me, it felt like it was about relationships and building those relationships. So that's why I brought that up. But what I wanted to ask you is, how familiar are you with Killer Mike?
Nothing at all. Okay. I didn't even know who he was, to be honest.
Yeah, you should check him out. Killer Mike is, for those out there who don't know, Killer Mike is a dope MC from Atlanta. He's had several projects solo. He's had several projects with LP or El Producto, who's a New York rapper / producer. They did Run the Jewels 1, 2, and 3. All great projects. Run the Jewels 3 made one of our top 10 lists, and then Run the Jewels 1 also made, but all 3 are dope projects. And then Killer Mike, I can't think of the name of the album offhand.
One thing I do want to mention is I liked how Nas mentioned his name. He says Killer Mike, like kill the mic. Yeah, kind of broke it down like that. That's kind of, I thought that was pretty interesting when he kind of broke that down.
Like I said, man, Killer Mike's been. He is a beast. As Kendrick said, if lyricism, basically, I can't remember the exact line from To Pimp a Butterfly. I think it's on Hood Politics, but basically saying that if you were really about, lyricism and words and the actual art of putting words together for MCs, then Killer Mike would be platinum every time he puts out an album, because that's how talented he is when it comes to lyricism. He's somebody that, like I said, Kendrick praised him, Nas praised him, so many people praise him for his lyricism. So, but the album that I was talking about was Rap Music. That's really when, for me, I really took notice of Killer Mike. It's a great album. There's a track on there that really got a lot of publicity called Ronald Reagan Era. But again, Killer Mike is a dope MC. You should definitely check him out. I recommend Rap Music, Run the Jewels 1, 2, 3, and any music that he puts out is dope. But I wanted to ask you specifically about the song that he released on, well, not released, but that he previewed on the documentary on Rapture.
The unreleased one, the Black Power, White Powder?
Yeah, Black Power, White Powder, yeah. What were your thoughts and feelings around the theme and the idea of that song?
Honestly, I'm gonna have to go back and rewatch that to really soak in the information. And I'm a person that takes a couple of tries to really stick to my head.
Gotcha. The feelings that I had about Black Power, White Powder is that, well, one, the production is nice. The production is very solid, and Killer Mike always delivers. Now, when he goes into and explaining the concept of it, I think it's very interesting, and it is something that I didn't think about it until after he brought it up, and it does make sense. Like, when you think about all of the great movies that, I won't say all of the great movies, but a lot of the great movies that we think about, especially when it comes to gangsters or criminals, they're all usually white. Al Capone, all of these criminals are gangsters, are celebrated and put on a pedestal for their intellectual ingenuity. But we never see any people of color in that same vein. We don't see, like you said, Bumpy Johnson, or the only one that I can think of recently was Frank Lucas, and that was in American Gangster.
Oh, the one with Denzel?
Yeah. So that is something that I do think isn't represented. And I also like the fact that the way that he explained it, that he's not necessarily talking about it to celebrate the criminal action of it, but more of their ingenuity and their intellectual capacity. Is that in order to be a successful criminal, you have to be pretty smart. Like that's the only way you can not get caught and make it so long is You have to be smarter than the people that are trying to catch you. So just taking that aspect of it, I thought it was a pretty interesting idea and a pretty interesting concept. And I just can't wait to see the full project when he has Jeezy on the hook as well as 2 Chainz on the verse, which he mentioned. as well as really fleshing out his full verse. I really would like to see that, and to see if the critique that Nas gave would stand up for me, because again, we didn't hear the full verse, so we don't know if he took the critiques that Nas gave and put that into the verse to give more explanation or backstory, or if he did something to the track to give backstory before the track starts. Like,
yeah, good point.
You know, like an interlude or something like that to, you know, segue into the track. So I think I'm anxious to see what that's going to be about. But again, from that scene, what I took away was of how open and receptive Nas was to giving advice and critiques, as well as the same for Killer Mike accepting it. I just think that was interesting, especially for both artists have been in the game so long. Killer Mike's he's not new to this. He's true to this. So I just thought that was an interesting dynamic. Again, like what I took again from the Nas part was based on relationships. The next relationship that they kind of segued into after that Killer Mike scene was Large Professor, which for those who don't know, Large Professor was one of the first producers Nas ever worked with. He did Halftime, One Time for Your Mind, Keep It Rollin', which was a Tribe Called Quest song, so he produced them as well. You're the Man, The Hardest for AZ. So he's a well-known producer, but that was really the producer that kind of helped Nas gain his sound. So I thought that introduction of, it seemed like every time they took us to what's current with Nas, they always made a way of taking us back. We saw in the beginning, you know, where Nas is at now. They took us back to his relationship with his brother. We saw where Nas was with Killer Mike now. They took us back to his relationship with Large Professor. So I just thought about that foreshadowing, or not foreshadowing, but revisionist of taking a look at the past and then also being current. I thought was interesting because that ties well into the documentary as of itself. It's Nas, who's a legend from the past, talking about these artists, and the artists talking about themselves who are current. I just thought that whole dynamic was interesting, how they highlighted it in this particular episode.
If I was him, I would have done the same thing too. I like to bring a correlation from the past to modern times.
And for you, if you were in his position, what would be the reason for you wanting to do that? What do you think it adds to the documentary that if it wasn't there, that it would be missing?
The history of it. Especially for people who aren't familiar. If I was in his shoes, who aren't familiar with me, I want them to get some sort of at least a very generic background or a very generic reason as to why I'm correlating it into modern times.
That kind of segues into the beginning of Dave East, because after that point, they start talking about, again, the scene that we talked about a little bit earlier with Jungle, talking about how him and Nas were talking about Dave East. Were you familiar with Dave East prior to the documentary?
Yeah, I was on iTunes just doing my thing, listening to some tracks, about to put it on my iPhone. And you know how on the very bottom it says what you like or what you preferred or something? Yeah. That kind of, it's like a, you know, automated system to kind of, if you like one genre, it'll give you, hey, you might like these ones.
Yeah, something similar. Out. Usually have similar sounds or content or something of a key to bring it together. Yeah.
So I found that one of his songs is on there. I don't remember which one I clicked exactly, but I liked the way his flow was. It kind of reminded me of Nas a little bit, and it's very real. I like the emphasis he puts on the words too. It's like he's trying to like speak a message in there. So I clicked on it, liked it, and I checked out his album. I can't remember the name of it, but it has Found a Way. That's one of my favorite ones. Paranoia, which if you notice, they were wearing the hat. They were heck wearing that.
Yeah, that's from his first. Well, not, I won't say his first, but that's from Paranoia: True Story that came out last year.
That's the one. That's the album. That was the one I checked out. And that was the only one I heard so far. And then when I heard he was going to be on the documentary, I said, oh, perfect, because this will give me a nice view of what he was like prior to music, or how he met Nas and how he got into the genre now.
My relationship with Dave East, I say I go back a couple of years with Dave East. I knew about him, I guess, Hey Me Now was probably, I guess, the first mixtape that I knew about him. I heard...
Oh, he was on that?
Yeah. No, not the Hey Me Now song by Nas. That was on, it was Written, I believe. But it's just it's a mixtape just called Hate Me Now.
Okay.
Which would probably make sense if it came out in 2015, that was a little bit after his introduction or him meeting Nas, or the shout out with Nas that they showed on the documentary. But Black Rose was really the first time that I really heard about Dave East. I didn't really check out the mixtape, but I heard some of my friends from New York were telling me, hey, there's a cat named Dave East. And I was like, okay. I didn't check him out until Paranoia. Or actually, Hate Me Now, I listened to it and I thought it was cool. I did agree. When I heard that, I was like, okay, he's definitely a New York rapper. He definitely is attentive to his craft. But really, the Paranoia, A True Story that came out last year, that's when he stuck with me. I really thought that was a really well done project. As you said, I felt like he wanted to let you know about him, and he really took the time to make sure that he dedicated the time to making sure that message was clear. And Paranoia 2, I thought, which was the album that came out this year, I thought that was a really good project as well. And again, it even highlighted even more his lyricism for me. So I think I'm really anxious to see what he has continued coming forward, as well as I feel like, unlike what I felt about the first episode with Logic, I felt like I learned a lot about Dave East through this documentary.
Interesting. How so? What was the most like resonating thing you picked up?
Just as him personally. Again, for me, I look more about interactions with people. How he dealt with people. The fact that he always had his daughter with him. I thought it was key, because again, even in Paranoia 2, he has a picture of his daughter in it. You don't really know how that emotion, how real that is until you see on an everyday basis. And the fact that no matter what interview we saw him in, his daughter was pretty much always present.
Yeah.
And there's maybe, from memory, I think maybe 2 scenes where his daughter wasn't in it. One
when
scene
he was on the
stairs,
steps.
and then the scene for the video, and he said the reason why he's late because he was with his daughter. So like, I just thought that was interesting, that listening to his music, especially Paranoia 2, I got that, but it's comforting to know that what he's talking about in his on his music, especially Paranoia 2, about his relationship with his daughter and how she's like the most important thing to him, actually holds to be true based on what we saw in the documentary. Again, we never really know these people because we're not around them,
right,
but we only can go based on the images that
are portrayed to us.
Exactly.
You know?
And so if it feels like the image that's portrayed to us in his music fits what's really in his life. What about you? Do you feel like, personally, the person that you got from the documentary, what do you think about the person Dave East, not the artist?
I thought he just seemed pretty just chill and laid back. He's very humble. I mean, he even has it tattooed on his left eyebrow. I mean, I like his humbleness approach. It's like if something good keeps happening, he's like, yeah, that's cool, whatever. And also I don't know the right word, but if you recall, people like in the projects, he wanted to help out, and they were like, nah, man, you got that. Don't worry about that. No. And he says, nah, but I feel like I wouldn't be here without you. I wouldn't be the person I am today without you guys here. So he feels like he has an obligation to go help them. That shows to me character. So I get a lot of respect for that, because I feel the same way if someone helps me grow. I was just talking with you last week. I said, you're pretty much my help. So whenever I get an award or whatever, and I said, nah, I got to give thanks to DeRa Brenson from the Stay Woke podcast, man, because without him, I wouldn't be here. So in essence, it's kind of like the same thing. So I see a little bit of myself in Dave East in that regard. And I like the grit he has too. If you notice, he's got like a real kind of rugged around the edge. Remember when he was talking with his family was saying, he should have stuck with the ball, should have stuck with basketball. Oh, and he played with Kevin Durant. I didn't even know that. That was pretty cool. But I think he's a fantastic person. Based on what I just seen, obviously. I
wanted to touch on there's a couple of things in that. The first thing that I do want to touch on is the thing you brought up about how the line. I was going to save it for later, but let's go right into it right now. That specific scene that you were talking about of where Dave East is basically saying, I appreciate the people that helped me get here, and I want to help them out, and I want to give back. And Nas and him both have similar takes, but they express it and verbalize it differently. Of that necessarily, it's like, yeah, and that I do agree with you on that fact, is that they both seem very humble, but at the same time, being humble, but you also have to be realistic. You can't help everybody. You literally cannot help everybody in the hood. You cannot help everybody from where you're, you know, where you are from.
That was what Nas was saying. He said there's some cats that don't want to.
Not even that. Just like on a logistic, from a business perspective, I cannot, like, yeah, he's wealthy, but like that's a whole nother amount of wealth that it takes to translate to bringing the whole hood and making them financially free. There's very few people that have that kind of capital, period. Nas doesn't. Nas is rich. Dave East, if you put them together, they don't have enough money to take Queensbridge out and make them go from low income to middle class. It's just not possible. So you have to think of a realistic approach to it, one. And then two, even on the other side is, the thing that I appreciate is Dave East saying that he had that problem of, there were times when he, like he said, he wanted to do all that, but then he had to realize the people that really care about you, the people that really are your supporters, they don't want anything in return. They don't need anything in return. So those are the ones that really are going to ride for you, and those are the ones that you should make sure that they are appreciated. And so I think if you take that approach, to me, and it takes me back to a line that I use often from Mick Jenkins: I can't give you what I still need for myself. At the end of the day, like, because if I give you everything I have, then how am I going to continue to help other people? Because I don't have anything left.
Exactly. That's like I heard this metaphor one time. So think of like a plane going down, right? And there's a mother and a baby, and the mask comes down. I mean, if you put the mask on the baby, you're going to die to where you can't help the baby anymore. So wouldn't it make sense to put it on you first, and then the baby, then keep going, back and forth, so that way you're able to help both parties instead of just one, and then you're dead, and then something happens. Yeah,
and then in that same situation, if you die, like you said, who's taking care of the baby? The baby can't take care of itself. So in essence, you lost two people. So you didn't really you didn't help the situation.
Right.
So it's just about getting to the point of doing that. And I thought that was really key and smart. And I'm glad that they made it a point to highlight it in this documentary, and specifically that in this episode. That I think was very important. Because again, there's a lot of people that are trying to come up and they do want to help the people that they're coming up with, but you have to pick and choose when's the time to do it. And 1 second, sorry. The other thing that I did think was very important as well was when Nas was the line that you're talking about. There's some people that no matter what you do, it's not going to help them because they're not in a position to be ready for that help. In essence,
that's true.
So that's important. Yeah. One of the lines that I thought was very it was very eye-opening to me was when Dave East, it was towards the end when is the song with Lin-Manuel from Hamilton and Nas, basically I wrote my way out. I just thought just that line, that idea is so profound that you can write your way out of a situation. Like, just that you can write your way, you can work your way, you can fight your way, you can, there's so many ways to get out of certain situations, but it requires a level of dedication that I think most aren't willing to do.
I think that I always hear, I used to hear this back in MLM that I was affiliated with. People were missing that grit. I think grit is the main determining factor, because anybody could say, oh, I can just start writing lyrics, I'm good with it. But if they don't have the grit, the groundwork to do it, it's not going to work. You have to have the grit to match with the desire. If I want to be huge, I want to be a bodybuilder, if I'm going in the gym but I don't have the grit like a bodybuilder, chances are I'm not going to have the results that I'm seeking, right?
Yeah. And grit can be synonymous with consistency. You have to be willing to be consistent enough to improve your craft. Same situation, a bodybuilder. Yeah, you can go to a gym. You can go to the gym today, work out for 8 hours, and never go back. What is that really going to do? But if you consistently go into the gym every day for an hour, you'll be further off than that guy that just went for one day for 8 hours.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? But it's that consistent, long-term grind and grit and dedication, even without seeing results. Take Dave East, for example. He's been rapping, writing. As his mother said, he's had journals full of lyrics. He's been doing this for a while. And even when he got the praise from Nas, even at that point when he got the praise from Nas, a legend, he still was like, okay, that's great.
Yeah,
I gotta get. I still.
right off.
That's great. I appreciate it. He ain't never got to do anything else for me. I don't need a handout. I don't need nothing. I appreciate that. But at the end of the day, I still gotta go. I still gotta go back here and do that homework. Get back in the lab. Be consistent. Stay on my craft. And I think that is what allowed him to get. Or well, I won't say allowed, but that's what helped him get to the level that he's at. Is that level of not getting complacent, regardless of what the praise is. Or lack of praise.
I definitely agree with that. As a matter of fact, I think it ties in with you. Remember the conversation we had last week when we were outside in your patio, and I said that say for example, I throw some appreciation to you, you're like, yes, yeah, you know, you appreciate it, then you brush it right off. It's like you don't focus on yesterday's successes. That is one thing I do admire about you, and I told you I think you're going to be fantastic because you're not focusing all your attention on what you previously did. You're like, yeah, that's good and all, but I still got to go over here. I got a lot more work to do where I want to go. Like I was saying, you're like a little groundhog, dude. You sit there and dig.
I appreciate that, man. That's one of the things that I took from Dave East. It's just that, like you said, that grit and relentless dedication to improving and not being complacent. So that's what really gravitated and resonated with me with regards to Dave East. Do you feel like, after seeing this documentary, do you feel like you know Nas better than you did prior?
A little bit. I saw a little bit of his humility side. Because obviously, aside from the music, we're not there, like you mentioned earlier, we're not there in person. We don't know these people in person unless you're very fortunate enough to really know them. But
hey, if you do, holla at us.
Hey,
so we
please.
can meet Nas as well.
But I definitely think it showed some humility side to him. Kind of how he heard of these up-and-coming new artists, which is why he selected them to be part of this documentary, because he definitely has an eye for talent, as I mentioned a little bit ago. But overall, I think it's just I actually get to see him more of his humility side for me that I was able to take away from this episode, especially.
For me, I would say I feel like I did learn some about Nas' personality. It just... And the reason why I say that is, one is I don't hear much about Nas outside of music. You hear about his business dealings, things of that nature, but you don't hear like tabloid stories. You don't hear.
He's pretty low key.
Yeah,
he's really low key.
So you don't. I mean, the biggest news that I heard was that he's dating Nicki Minaj, but like you don't.
Wait,
really,
he is?
That's the rumor. Yeah.
Oh wow! I had no idea. Holy shit!
Breaking news. No, just playing. No, but that's a rumor. I don't know if that's been confirmed or not. Whatever. But he is pretty low key. So I just felt like him, and he's low key, and it has to be by design, because he's famous enough that if he wanted to be seen more, he would be seen more. So what I mean by that is there are artists out there, like I said, like we talked about Logic, who's always on social media, always out there, always. Shoot, I can tell you, I think Logic was at the studio yesterday. If you look on Instagram, like, you know,
yeah, I do follow.
you're he keeps you abreast of his whereabouts often. Where Nas, you're not given that kind of fly on the wall kind of view of his life. You get what he releases. So I thought this giving a more introspective look into his life, I thought was interesting, and it gave a personal aspect to it that I think might have been lacking prior, because Nas has been out for so long. But yet when it comes to like personal interactions, Jay-Z's pretty low key too. But you feel like you hear more stories about Jay-Z than you do Nas.
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying. So I just thought that was an interesting aspect of it too. And I think for this particular episode, I think it was necessary to show again Queensbridge bridging the gap between Nas and Dave East. Old New York, new New York, old lyricism, new lyricism, but that it's not that much. It's similar to that saying, cut from the same cloth. That they're both cut from the same cloth. They're slightly different times.
Oh yeah, of course. Like
so I thought that was very keen. And again, the thing that I found the most I guess key thread through this whole thing was attentiveness to your craft. Nas said it so many times. Nas highlighted it so many times. Dave East acknowledged that, that's what he's about, is dedicating to his craft. I just thought that was important, and family.
Do you remember the? I do agree with that. That's very well brought up too. Do you also remember the very last thing Nas was saying towards the end of, I believe it was the entire thing about power?
Yes.
What do you think about that?
I thought it was pretty profound, and especially I thought it was more profound that it's coming from somebody who, if you again looking in the rap game or in hip hop, who basically has almost as much power as anybody in the game. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. And the fact, like I said, that he's almost at the pinnacle of power of hip hop, and then to still be that aware of how the power dynamic is and not to be jaded by that, I thought was interesting, and it shows you how grounded he is as a result of that. Because you can't have that opinion or that idea without being grounded, to me. What did you think?
That's a pretty good perspective. What I took away from that was, I believe, now he didn't say this word for word, but I think the underlying message, or at least what I took from it, was use that power, but direct it to a good cause rather than what we normally kind of use our power for. So I liked his whole idea on that. And the fact that he's using his power and his I'm forgetting the word, but aside from the point, he's able to help other artists help them instead of just doing what he's doing. It's like, yeah, we'll kind of get your own power. He's like, well, I got this power. Why don't I just give it to you guys? I'll help you guys out. I like how he pick and chooses where he's distributing his power to.
Yeah, he abdicates his power to those that he feels are worth it, one, but also those who are willing to put in the work to deserve it.
That's true, too.
Because there's a lot of other artists out there that he could easily give it to. You know, like he said, there's four other artists that they were talking about with Dave East, and they picked Dave East because of all those attributes that we mentioned throughout this podcast. What I will say is, as we wrap this up, is that I'm definitely excited and interested to see what else Dave East has coming moving forward. I'm definitely interested in to hear the new Nas project that should be dropping this year, I believe.
What is that? Give us some detail on that. I didn't hear that.
That's all the details I got.
Oh, dang. Okay.
I know is since last year he's been working on an album.
Okay.
Yeah, that he's been working on an album. I think Large Professor did some of the production on the new project that should be coming out this year.
Do you know if Pete Rock's going to be on there? Because I did know that Pete Rock helped him with Illmatic, right?
Yeah, I heard that Pete Rock was going to have some production on it. There was another producer I can't think of right now who also, I heard those three had definitely a strong influence on the production of this project. Oh, okay. So definitely interested to hear that. Definitely interested to see what Dave East has coming, and that just to see how he evolves and grows. Because again, based on this documentary and based on the praise that Nas has given him, plus what I've heard from him, he has a promising future. We just gotta rock with him and see where it goes.
I think he definitely does have a huge promising future, the way he is, and the sky's the limit for this guy.
Yeah,
I can't wait to see what other projects he has coming out in the next. From this point on.
Yeah. Same here. If you haven't, definitely you need to check out all of Nas' discography. I don't need to go through all that. You should.
Everything.
Everything he's made. Go through his whole discography and get it. And for Dave East, definitely check out the Black Rose mixtape. Check out Paranoia, A True Story, and Paranoia 2, as well as Hate Me Now. You can get all of those either on iTunes, SoundCloud, or I'm sure you can find some of it on YouTube. So definitely go check those out. You know that we will have an episode 3 or part 3 of Rapture discussion, and that's going to be covering T.I. That's going to be a very interesting conversation. Of course, we're going to have Mr. Trance Man again for that one. And if you haven't already, go check out Vibrationz Podcast. Again, if you're not sure where to find that on Apple Podcasts or Apple Podcasts, click on the link below, and it will direct you right there so you can listen to it. And as well as go check them out on YouTube. And, man, again, thanks for another great Rapture discussion. And
likewise, thank you, man.
No problem. And you know our motto. Live, listen to some great music, and above all, love more. And for this one, listen to some Davies and Nas as well. And we're out.